Welcome to Living a Luxury Lifestyle, where we talk with influencers in luxury lifestyle products and services from around the globe. I'm your host, Cliff Perotti. Welcome to Living a Luxury Life. I'm your host, Cliff Perotti. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Mary Brennan, who is the CEO and founder of House of Fine Design in the New York area. She's a graduate of Parsons School of Design and has been a luxury influencer for over 22 years. She's a member of the American Society of Interior Designers and has served as its president in 2009. She works in both residential and commercial design, and we're excited to have her on the show today. So with that, let's hear her amazing story. Welcome to Living a Luxury Life, Mary Brennan.
Hi, Cliff. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
No problem. I'm actually very excited to have this discussion. Just having interacted with you through the Lux Council and some of our weekly phone calls, my respect for your knowledge and just some of your thinking is just phenomenal. And I really want to kind of dig into some of that here today with you. So I always like to start by getting some background on you. And so why don't you start by, where are you originally from?
I am from New Jersey. I still live in New Jersey.
Okay.
Originally from a town called Mahwah in Bergen County. Go T-Birds. And so, yeah, I end up living not too far from where I grew up.
Oh, that's funny.
Did most of my schooling here in New Jersey and then, of course, in New York City as well.
Now, do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a couple of sisters.
Uh-huh.
One's here in New Jersey, one's in Dallas.
Any of your family members involved in the design or architecture type industry?
No, they're not. But I jokingly have said in the past, I think that my natural affinity for color, I believe, was baked in. My dad was in the pigment and dye industry.
What?
And,
that's interesting.
Very, very interesting. They made some of the accounts that he called on were like Bic pens. They made the black that colors the ink in Bic pens.
Wow.
So, all kinds of different industries he touched. And so we talked about color a lot. And true story, when we were little kids, they used to give you those little lollipops at the bank and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I distinctly remember that some woman asked, what color lollipop would we like? And my sister and I said magenta. True story. True story. Now, no other child would say magenta.
You're not to pick magenta, burnt sienna. It's like, what?
So funny. So it's been there from the beginning, for sure.
Okay. Now, did you always want to be in interior design, or kind of when did that kind of become a passion for you?
I think at my heart, that's what I always wanted to do. When I was getting out of high school, I did not really have anybody who showed me that that was really a possibility. So it's not what I pursued at first. I just pursued a general business degree. Which of course ended up serving me later on anyway. But sort of about midway through, I said, I have to work for a lot of years. I should really do something that I love.
Wow, you discovered that at an early age, as opposed to some of us, which discovered that you're doing something you didn't really love and you have to start all over again.
Yeah, but I was so far along in the business degree, I couldn't just let it go. So I actually got 2 degrees simultaneously.
Okay.
Took me a little bit longer to do it that way, but I couldn't see dropping it just part way. So
now and I don't really understand how Parsons works. I want to touch on that a little bit. Did you go to a college other than Parsons and then transfer for kind of your interior design stuff to Parsons? Is that what you did?
Somewhat the reverse. I actually got my degree from Berkeley College.
College, that's it, of course.
Yeah, but I did a good number of individual coursework at Parsons, did one or two at New York School of Interior Design. I sort of felt like that was the epicenter, New York City, and I was going to get certain things from those classes that I just couldn't get in the school that I was in. So it was a sort of circuitous route, but it was the right thing to do, I think.
Well, you know, it's funny, and in your industry, you know, Parsons is, and in fashion, Parsons is just a name.
Right.
But you know who made it super crazy famous is the whole Tim Gunn, the whole Parsons. When I visited New York after that whole, what is it, Project Runway had been on the air for a long time. And of course, you had to go to the store and stand there and look at the dog. And then you had to go over to see where Parsons was. It's like me and about 5,000 other people a day, I suspect. It was just kind of crazy. So you go ahead and you graduate from Parsons. You get your design. Now, one of the things that you hold is a CAPS certification. What does that mean exactly?
It's a certified aging in place specialist.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's it has now transitioned into what they call living in place.
Okay.
But it's really the science of understanding how of a variety of different abilities and mobilities need to be able to use their space um, safely, effectively, without barriers. And that translates into the bigger picture of truly universal design, which that principle is that all users in all spaces should be able to equally as easily use the space, find their way, and be safe at the same time.
So one of the things that I always look for is, you know, kind of what excites a person about their industry. And you know, we've talked about luxury before in some of our calls, and how it really, there's a lot about the story of luxury. You've said that one of the reasons you get so excited and connected uh, about your work is that you've seen the power of design transform people's lives. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Oh my goodness, there are so many examples I could give. Some of the easiest things, right?
Sure.
So, which really get to be complex, but people don't realize it. Let's say you have a couple who is enjoying a fabulous lifestyle, and
Mm-hmm.
their home's a beautiful home, but it's really not 100% what it could be because it's not bringing them joy every day. So they have this magnificent home, it's a lot to keep up with and that sort of thing, but there's nothing that inspires or enriches them. Digging a little bit deeper through my process of interpretive interior design, what I really sometimes find out is that the underlying issue is someone in that house, maybe both people, don't really feel fully expressed. Maybe they've made compromises so that let's just get the space done. That's what he wanted or that's what she wanted. And compromise is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when brought to a higher level, nobody has to feel like there's been a sacrifice there. So
Yeah.
really the transformative piece is there's a more harmonious living experience because the space is doing what it should be doing.
Boy, I can see that happening with a couple in particular, where one just says, you know, hey, whatever you want, you know, that's fine. I don't care about this room. It's your room. You know, you do it. And it's like, but they have to walk through it every day, or they have to live in it. And it's like, God, I hate where they place this column. It's annoying.
You know,
Yeah.
that's sort of a simplistic example, but I feel that what we should be experiencing at home to match everything else that might be wonderful and joyful about our life outside the four walls, so to speak. If you've ever had one thing that you absolutely treasure, Maybe it's a trinket box. Maybe it's something that was handed down through the generations. Maybe it's something you found on one of your travels. And it's just you touch it gently. You make sure it's well cared for and protected. And you put it away in its special spot. And every time you bring it out, you have this sense of, oh, I love this thing. Well, that's what your home should be doing for you every day.
Oh, that's a great way of looking at it. Now, is when you say interpretive, is that what you mean by that, interpretive design? I mean, is it really digging into the lives of the individuals that you're working with and interpreting that into the actual design itself?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Interesting.
Um, it's really sort of a process that I've developed over the years, and in the very beginning, it's more of a discovery process and we explore together. And sometimes we're not talking about furniture or architecture directly, but we may be talking about other things. And it becomes a process of knowings, right? So I know what these people are about. I know what speaks to their soul, so to speak. And only at that point am I able to create what I'm able to create.
Hmm. Well, and you've said that really well-designed space should say something about the people who live there. That makes total sense given what you've just said.
Right,
Total sense.
right.
So, who typically brings you in on a project? Is it the homeowner themselves? Is it an architect? Is it a contractor? How do you typically get introduced to a prospective project or client?
Certainly, there are client referrals, but as you can imagine, on some of these projects, that's a very long term project.
Sure.
And, so it may be 2 years before someone is done and happy and starting to refer, right? So, very often, it's someone else on the team. It might be the developer, it might be a custom uh, builder and there's just no one on the design piece of it. There may be an architect,
Hmm.
but sometimes they don't overlap very much if the designer is not, sort of a critical role on that team. So very often they will bring me in and make the introduction to the client, and then they sort of see, oh, yeah, we do need to do this really early in the process. We need to be, it's very easy to do it on paper. Nobody has spent any money. Ground hasn't been broken or walls haven't been broken. And it really gives the opportunity to design from the inside out.
Hmm. Well, and you're touching on a question, which is, at what point do you feel, I probably know the answer to this, but at what point do you feel a designer should be brought into the project?
As early as possible, for sure.
So I wake up in the morning, I go, I want to redo my kitchen. I need to call Mary.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to remodeling and major renovations and things, I realize that I'm biased, but I cannot imagine getting partway through that process if it's not design driven, because you can price out cabinetry, you can price out the labor for the construction, but what are they pricing? It
Mm.
doesn't make any sense to me, and you're not going to get everything in the end that you may have gotten had you employed the design component way early.
I had an occasion to, been in real estate for many years, and I've had occasion to look at a lot of different houses. And I can tell you when I walk into a kitchen, whether they used a designer or not. Does that make sense? Because it's like putting that there makes absolutely no sense. You're going to bump it every time you do this, or you're going to turn it. This is too narrow. There's just not. I think that when I think of using a designer, I think that one of the things that happens is you're going to bring just years of experience of designing kitchens and living rooms and bathrooms and areas in the house, that you're going to see the obstacles way in advance of having them occur. I mean, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Well,
there are things that people don't necessarily think will enhance a design because it just hasn't occurred to them, or they didn't know that that would be on their wish list. Where, you know, I might say to myself in the beginning of let's take your example of a kitchen. um, I can think of a home that I did in Greenwich, Connecticut, and new construction, and going through the kitchen layout and everything. On the lower level of the home, there was a giant, you know, great room space that, as the kids grew, ultimately would take on a number of different lives, right?
sure.
For sure, it would be family entertaining, possibly adult entertaining, and so forth. And in the process of that kitchen, I thought, you know, we have this one funny little corner. Wouldn't that be a great place to put a dumbwaiter? So snacks and everything can be prepared, lower them down on the dumbwaiter. Nobody's carrying stuff up and down the stairs. It's
Brilliant.
easy. The kids can even do it. They didn't ask for that, but in the design process, I discovered this might be a possibility and it might enhance how they use the space.
Sure, sure. I mean, that's a great simple example. Um, you've been doing this for a very long time. What's been one of the biggest challenges you have faced in a project?
Ooh. Often, timelines can be an issue
Hmm.
for sure. You know, I will say that when when you're working in a high-rise situation,
Oh yeah.
houses and whatnot, I have often said I think the men that control the elevators are really the richest men in New York City.
They're the gods. Yeah.
Because they will let you up when they're good and ready to let you up, and
Ah,
for a
you gotta
price.
love it. Yeah, that's really true. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Um, well,
But
and you're touching.
the gathering of the team really,
Uh-huh.
and bringing everyone's timelines together. Um, Not that it's the type of challenge that can't easily be overcome, but when the team functions as a team, it is smooth sailing.
Hmm.
When things become disjointed, the designer's doing this piece, the builder's doing this piece, the architect is doing this piece, it becomes a little fragmented and it's harder to get it smooth.
You're being so polite. It's hell. I call it the wheels fall. And I've done, I have not done as nearly to the extent of the projects you've done, but we've done a lot of, at one point I was really involved in the condo conversion business, and, from apartments into condos. And we would have architects, designers, kitchen people, plumbers, and you're trying to mastermind these timelines. And invariably, in fact, one of my questions was to you, sometimes I say time is your enemy, right? Every day that goes by costs money because either the project is sitting there or materials are sitting there you're paying for, but people are being paid, and oftentimes, and you're waiting. And I can remember we had a moment when Katrina had hit, and we were in the middle of a project. And one of the things that was a consequence of Katrina was that all of the plywood in the United States went to New Orleans. And we were in the middle of putting plywood siding up on a building, right? And so we had an order for, let's say, 100 pieces of plywood, and all we could get was 20. And so you end up with these moments where you have to reconfigure what you're doing and the order in which you're doing. And I see the designer as kind of the mastermind of that process. Is that accurate in as terms of a role?
Yes, if they're skilled at project management, it really should be, because again, a design led project,
Mm-hmm.
that's where everything has to flow from.
Right.
Right? So I don't want the crew and the trades ready to work and things aren't ready for them.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
everything has to be hand and glove.
Well, and the worst nightmare, I mean, sometimes you end up with these decisions. And I think you talk about it in one of your videos where you are faced with things that happen where you suddenly have to make a decision of, do you really want this one thing, or do you want this project to stay on track time-wise? I mean, you must deal with that especially in the luxury clientele market, I would assume.
Yeah, for sure. I often, sort of have to help reshape the way people think about certain things. Now, some things you simply can't wait for, right? As you said in your example, you know, if you're going to blow your entire construction timeline out of whack, then you might need to rethink something.
Right.
But on some of the other pieces, if there is something that is really going to bring it from this level way up here, but we have to wait 20 weeks, it's worth the wait.
Yeah.
It's worth the wait. And we'll do everything that we need to do to keep everything else rolling. But don't hack it out of the project just to save a couple of weeks.
Well, and I think that oftentimes I think in the lower end market, I think people do what they have to do to just keep it moving. I think in the luxury marketplace, the client has the ability to, you know what, let's go ahead and wait for that piece of special marble or that one thing that we want to wait for. And I think that sometimes the danger that happens when you're doing one of these projects, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you postpone something because you're missing something or you need something to arrive that hasn't. And suddenly your tradesmen are off on other projects because they only allocated a certain amount of time. And it's like, uh-oh, we got a problem here.
But like anything else, I think if you handle it head on,
Right.
from the get-go, right? You're going to say, all right, we're going to be a month out before we're ready for them again. And they say, obviously, we're not going to sit here for a month. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's get our arms around this. What job do you have to do that will fit into a reasonable time away from this job? And will you come immediately back here? And again, the beauty of the team, right? Everybody wants the best possible outcome.
Well, and I think that communication is essential in those situations. You can figure it out if you're all communicating well.
Precisely. And there are times I'll just interject one other thing on that timetable. In the case where I might be working on a commercial location, either a storefront type business or a medical practice or what have you, that gets that has the additional time sensitivity of every day that their door is closed, they're not bringing in revenue, right?
Right.
So sometimes in those cases, you might have to make a design pivot or a materials change or something like that. But being able to be nimble with your resources and where you're getting things from, what can you expedite, what can you swap in its place, allows you to keep that flow going.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you get on a project, what would you say are kind of your first 2 or 3 steps that you've got the opportunity to do the project? What are the first 2 or 3 things you typically like to jump on?
Number one, the very first thing is really beginning that process of knowing the client. That is not really a 1 meeting, 2 meeting, even 3 meeting thing. That has to evolve for it to get to the level that's ideal.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a new friendship, right? It evolves. It reveals itself to you. And, in sort of tandem with that, I'm really wanting to know the space. So I do like to spend a significant amount of time in the physical space whenever possible. Of course, if it's not built yet, that's another story.
I got to tell you, I'm so glad to hear you say this. I can only share with you that when I remodel a space and I'm trying to reconceive how I literally go and take a chair and sit there with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and I'm literally just sitting there and absorbing the space. And you start to realize, oh, the light's really good here, or it's not great there, or ooh, the flow would be. I mean, I don't know how you can do that unless you just literally sit there.
Yes, it's absolutely true. And all kinds of things become apparent to you when you've spent some quality time communing with the space, right?
Exactly. That's a good way of putting it. um, do you have any role models or mentors that have influenced the way you see things or the way you do business?
Oh boy. Um, well, a couple. There are some. There's a no well-known architect, Peter Marino, who, when I was just beginning, he was much more known for. Maybe I should say maybe not known everywhere, but he was much more published for his interiors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Over a couple of decades of time, he's, you know, known the world over at this point. And I thought it was interesting watching that evolution of growing the team, growing the locations, what kinds of projects presented themselves as a result of that. So from a business model point of view, that might not be, I feel my sweet spot is more the boutique firm,
Uh-huh.
where I like to keep a small team and I like to be personally involved in everything. But knowing that there is still an evolution that comes along, regardless of what that looks like for each firm.
Right.
And actually, there was a designer that I worked for when I first got out of school. And she wasn't known per se, but extremely talented and extremely confident in when she would do something that it was the right thing to do. And I can remember, of course, then we weren't doing AutoCAD. So
Oh,
when I would
oh
go,
Lord. Yeah.
oh my goodness,
Oh,
I
this
had a
took a long time to do things then.
holy cow, talk about erasing. So I would go and I would pick up a project that I might have been working on the day before. And I'd drawn out this whole big plan. And I then had to erase probably 50% of it because she wanted to move something, I am not kidding you, 3 inches.
Oh Lord. Yeah.
And at the time, being very green myself, I was thinking in my head, really, I'm doing this for 3 inches. But you
Hmm.
know what? That 3 inches mattered.
Yeah.
It really mattered to the execution of, we were doing some built-ins and it affected the crown molding and all of those things. And I think that she knew that I was struggling in the back of my mind with, why am I doing why am I doing this? And
Damn
she
it, as I
let me,
grow, as I'm sitting here redrawing everything.
oh my
Give me
gosh.
my eraser.
Lesson learned, it completely mattered. It completely mattered.
Well, and don't you think, and I've heard, this is a thing that I think I've heard through some of your video work. It is the attention to the small detail that makes a difference in luxury. Wouldn't you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. It's the difference between a space being, this is really nice, to, holy cow, I went to this place, you would not believe this place. That's the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so impactful, and when you're dealing with the estate industry in particular, selling them, and you'd see houses that are $50 million that have a kitchen that shouldn't be in that house. It's not enough. There's just not enough attention to the way the thing flows. You walk into the room and you go, this does not work. I don't know who did this. I would honestly, bluntly say it was designed by some male contractor architect who didn't have any clue as to how a kitchen really works. You know what I mean? It's like, oh no, just because the cabinet fit there did not mean it should have gone there.
Right, right. And sometimes it's almost imperceptible exactly what's off or
Yeah,
what's
I think
not
that's true.
what it could be, and it could be just a proportion is a little too big, a little too small. it needs something else. It's not always easy to place your finger on why it, you know, as I sort of refer to it in my mind, is sometimes a space just sings.
I like that.
And
Yeah,
that's
I like
really,
that.
it's that level of attention to detail.
You know, when I've sold some of these houses to a client, and they're saying, "Oh, we're going to have to remodel this kitchen. We're going to have to remodel this. We're going to have to remodel that," and they haven't even really. When people buy a house like this, oftentimes they're literally only in that house for, I'd say, less than 2 hours at the most, and they're already like, "Oh my gosh, I got to redo this and redo that." And I'm going. Sometimes I would tell people, maybe what you want to do is live in it for a few months to understand the flow of how you are going to live in this house, and take that information and see where the obstacles are, which room doesn't feel right to you, and then go at it. So you've had some kind of experience with the space, because nothing's worth. I have seen people redesign a complete living room, family room, whatever, only to turn around and go, I hate it. Now I got to redo it again. Because they didn't get a sense of the space at all. One of the things that you said that caught me is, how often are you on the job site on a project?
More than many other people I know.
Probably more than the contractor really wants you to be.
Could be in some cases. I spend an awful lot of time with the client, but I'm also there. And part of what I love about doing the construction piece of it,
Mm-hmm.
being involved on that level, when I do a full tile layout, for example, a master bath, let's say,
Sure.
I've designed it to the inch, to every, the shower head gets placed here because the tile starts from here because. And they can look at the plans, and any talented installer is going to know what to do. But I like to be there when we're starting, because there's always going to be some random pipe that's in the wall that nobody knew was there, or some little thing that says, you know what, if we move this if we just bump it up an inch and a half, it's going to read so much better. So when I do like to be there with the trades as they're getting started on those things. When I do lighting plans, oh, I can't tell you how many electricians will say, I don't know why we're doing all of this. It doesn't have to be that close to the wall. But when I'm there, I can say, no, I know that you would on standard, go X far away. The reason we're putting it here is because.
Right. Right.
Then you have their buy-in, and they'll be executing it the way they're supposed to.
Well, and I think that I can't tell you how much money I have saved by being the guy standing there when they're moving a pipe. I'm going, you can't move that over there. If you do that, here's what's they don't understand the whole scope, right? But you do, and then also if you and I assume you get these relationships with your tradesmen that, having worked with you a number of times, they'll say, hey, Mary, I'm going to do this the way you've got it designed, but here's what I'm seeing if we do this, where
Yes.
they know the way you think, and they bring something to your attention and go, oh, wow. And you get an opportunity to say, let's make that adjustment right now. I've got to believe those relationships with those tradesmen are critical for you over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, that is an excellent point, because it is a two-way street, right? I can design it on paper, but I'm not the one cutting those tiles,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
there may be some little juncture where things come together and somebody comes up with a great idea. Maybe I'm not liking the way it's meeting in a certain corner. And he'll be able to say, well, if we did this. So that is absolutely the beauty of that.
Yeah. Now, I see that in your background, you've done a lot of lighting work. Um, how does lighting, this is kind of a dumb question, but I'll just ask it anyway, but how does lighting for you influence a space?
Oh my, it is remarkable how a properly lit space, there's a whole new life to that project then, right? So Not only do you need to have the scientific aspect of it, I'll say, down pat, the number of lumens and
Lumens, right.
proper adequate amount of lighting, but lighting from a variety of different sources. Of course, oftentimes in new construction that has nobody acting in the design role, you may have the majority of your lighting coming as overhead lighting. It doesn't feel as livable
Right.
as a space that is, maybe something is backlit, maybe something is glancing the wall because there's a texture there. You have lamp lighting, you have softer ambient lighting. How much daylight do you have? It affects the way the human eye reads color. It affects the way we interact with the space around us, mood,
I was
everything.
exactly going to say it affects your mood. I mean, I've been in houses and lived in houses where, oh man, the lighting was depressing at times, especially during long winters in Chicago.
Oh, I can imagine.
Oh Lord. So I noticed that you went through about 2 years ago a rebrand from M. Brenner Associates to House of Fine Design. What prompted that?
Um, it's interesting. I didn't necessarily grow in size, but I think really it stemmed from wanting to speak to the overall concept that it's all fine design when it's really elevated to the level that it can be. And that, whether it's residential, whether it's working for a developer who might be um, putting up a number of different residential properties at once, creating fine design to that level. It's more than just about the interiors. It's the whole package put together.
Mm-hmm. I see that you do not only residential, but you also do commercial, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit. Um, what sort of impact are you having in a commercial project? Because I'm thinking to myself, oh, it's a dumb office, but there are offices, and then there are offices, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you also talked about retail. I mean, give me an idea of some of the projects that you've dealt with or touched on in commercial arenas.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not necessarily work that I market myself to, but
Right.
when it finds me, I'm quite happy to do it. And that interpretive piece is very much alive in those projects, because not only do I need to know, something about who's hiring me and what's motivating the project and all of that, but I also need to find out every single thing there is to know about who the users of the space are. So if it's a customer facing business, who are your customers and what is the brand experience that you want them to have of your brand? And how do I develop that into the physical environment, right?
It goes back to that interpretive concept, the way you treat it. Yeah, that's
Right.
great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I consulted once. She didn't end up taking the office space, but I consulted once for a pediatric office. And pediatric offices, it's, they see everybody from newborn infants until they leave for college.
Right.
So it's runs such a gamut. So you can't necessarily say, oh, pediatrics, little kids.
Right.
It's got to serve multi-purposes, right? And it was quite interesting. She was really open and receptive to the idea of sort of zoning some of the weight areas. And then, we came up with sort of for the littler kids with shorter attention spans, sometimes there's a wait, and how are we going to keep them occupied without burdening the staff of now we have to clean up the play area, right? Come up with
Yeah.
some creative ideas.
Who designed this?
Yeah. And what she wanted to communicate to her patients was the sense that she was there for their overall wellness, So small things that we had suggested on all of the fluorescent overhead lighting, for example, we put on kind of like a film that was all blue sky and puffy clouds.
Oh,
And rather than spacing them every couple of feet apart in the ceiling grid, we grouped them together in the center. So in the center, it was really just the lighting, but
mm-hmm.
it looked like you were looking up into this big blue fluffy sky. And it was
Oh, nice.
really just that feeling of a breath of fresh air.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Now, what are some of the, you have any fun projects you're working on right now?
Let's see. I just completed a small office for the US office of eDesign Interactive. So they are a multi award winning creative firm. They design like amazing websites and different online presences for business. And it's quite interesting, a creative designing for another creative.
I'll bet. Yeah.
Right. It was like, oh,
I'd be like,
I'm
oh
gonna
God, okay.
have to prove my chops, right? So it was interesting because he's the satellite office, so much of the time he's there by himself. But when he brings the team, they're always there for a dynamic, think tank. We're going to whiteboard everything. It was very much a lively space.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really fun to design for that atmosphere, wanting something to create, again, who's going to be using the space, right? So I needed to create an energetic, creative atmosphere there. And then on the residential side right now, I'm working on a whole house sort of redo. It's not new construction.
Uh-huh.
But I guess it's probably about 12 or 15,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
And we're touching everywhere in the house. We're sort of moving about floor to floor at this point.
You're when you say that phrase, it reminded me of something immediately that I was taught by an architect. He said, look, there's the area you're going to work at, but then there's what we call the impact area, which is all the area that you're going to impact that has nothing to do with the area you're working in. And that has been a really valuable lesson in planning projects that I've been involved with. And when you're talking about there's always the person who decides in the very beginning when they're going to do their first remodel, I'm going to just live in the house and we're going to redo the kitchen and the bathrooms while we're doing that. I tell people, good luck. Unless you're going to bring your butane stove out on the back deck and light it up, you're going to, because it does impact everything when you're touching these major key rooms, right?
Oh, people forget, I don't have a coffee maker for 3 weeks. What?
Where's my espresso? What? I'm not going to Starbucks.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. As small as it sounds, you take a family with 3 teenagers and you take away the master bath, their life is pretty different for a while.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've often told people, don't live here for this. Let me get you, we'll find a place for you to live while this is going on. Yeah. And especially in some of these higher end projects where they're not over in 3 months. They're going to be a 6 month, 8 month, 9 month, or a year long project. Don't be trying to live in a house like that. You'll end up divorced or killing your spouse, and that's not going to help you.
Absolutely.
I love some of the tips that you have shared on some of your like Instagram stuff. What would you say are your top 3 design tips that you would give to someone who's considering a project right now?
Let's see. For sure, the number one would have to be get your interior designer first.
Get them on board early. Okay.
Get them on board early. Think it through, design it through. Specifically with construction and renovation, I would say exactly to your point that you just made a minute ago, thinking through and planning for when you're in the thick of it. How can you adjust if you must live there? I certainly have clients who have multiple homes, so they can just go to another home for a while and it takes so much pressure off.
Hmm.
But when that is not the case, um, you can set some things up ahead of time that will facilitate you living there peacefully. Um, if you have a basement that has a wet bar area, you can make yourself a mini kitchen
Hmm.
for a while, you know,
Yeah.
and at least have a serviceable, user-friendly space. Um, and let's see, I would say to be receptive to outside the box thinking.
Oh, good. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's really important when you give the design the space to evolve and grow and deepen. So many more good things are going to come out of it.
You gave another tip that I have to get out because I think it is so invaluable and just says so much. You said, when you are considering um, fabrics or a product, a floor product or whatever, make sure that you get your hands on the physical product as early as you can so that you can feel it and touch it and look at it and know exactly what it is you're dealing with, because not everything looks the same or feels the same on a screenshot, right?
100% true. Yeah, yeah. And likewise, we were getting back to being in the physical space, right? Um, there may be, well, when I do a color palette for
Mm-hmm.
the finished space, I have an idea of what I want to bring forward, right? But I never make a final color decision until I'm in the space, because what it looks like in my studio is not necessarily the same as it's going to look in that client's space. Their lighting is different, ceiling height is different, the volume of space is different, how it's lit.
Right.
So the final decision is always made on site.
Yeah. And you're bringing to mind a bad story. I had one of the things that I became an expert in is the hardness of hardwood engineered or laminate type floors and the differences between them, because nothing nothing changes someone will say, oh, I don't want to spend that much per square foot or per yard or whatever it is for a particular engineered product. And I'm going, no, you need to, because if you've ever walked on high heels on that floor, it's going to dimple unless it's a level of hardness. And people don't, those are the little teeny things that you're going to be aware of because you've just worked with so many different flooring and material. This fabric is not going to hang well or is not going to look as good as you think it is on this couch. And here's why. Um, I think that it's really critical, and I really respected the fact that you brought that out on your website. So thank you for that. Um, so now, what can we look forward to in Mary Brennan's first book?
Oh my. Well, it's funny. It has sort of done a little flip flop here and there. It's a slower process than I maybe gave it credit for when I started. And, I think the reason for that on my end is that I didn't want to make a picture book of basically my portfolio.
Right.
What I really want to speak to is, what does luxury even mean? Right? It's very subjective, number one. And really, it's so broad. It's so broad.
Well,
Um,
I'm going to come back to that question because we're going to talk about that. But so what is your book about ultimately? Is it about luxury design, or is it about this interpretive concept? Is it about
it's really about interpretive in terms of um, really understanding the value that comes with making luxury a real living, breathing, tangible part of your life. So that goes beyond the fabulous trips that you may take. That goes beyond, you might live in a $30 million estate, but what is that space doing for you, and where is the luxury in that? The luxury is in the effortlessness, in the comfort, in the beauty, in the artisanship. It's sort of should be a part of everything. And how do we bring that into our lived experience?
Well, and so let me just roll right into the kind of our final question, if you will, for our session today. And that is, what does luxury really mean to you?
I think that for me, as I experience it, being in, and I'll speak specifically to interiors, right?
Sure, of course.
Being in a space feels luxurious to me when not only is it beautiful, but it's highly functional, right? It makes me happy. Nothing is difficult. I don't have to fuss over things. Everything is effortless. The time spent within that space is pure enjoyment.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Mary Brennan, for being with us on Living a Luxury Life. You've been great, learned a lot about you and your industry as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you out in the field. Thank you again for being on the show.
I really enjoyed it, Cliff. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening in on this episode of Living a Luxury Life. This program is brought to you by the Luxury Marketing Council, a global network of leaders and influencers in the international luxury industry. Join us next time as we discuss trending topics with luxury lifestyle influencers. I'm your host, Cliff Perotti. Thank you for tuning in.